Every now and again you come across an amazing story attached to a famous instrument like a Stradivarius or a Demise. And sometimes I think of these instruments as being like famous celebrities that are super long lived, so living centuries. And they have various stories and histories attached to them. Some stand out more than others. We know that even during Stradivarius' lifetime, his instruments were highly regarded and sought after by kings and queens, counts, you name it. So some of these instruments have been in the hands of aristocratic people, counts, kings, generals. One was even on Nelson's ship. Some of these instruments have survived bombing raids, invasions, fires, sinking ships, you name it. Some of these instruments have been through fascinating events. Now, this particular story is a rather unusual one, if not somewhat tragic one. And it has to do with the 1709 Ward Stradivarius. That's W-A-R-D-E, to distinguish it from the Ward, W-A-R-D, Stradivarius, which is a different instrument. So the 1709 Ward Stradivarius, of course made by the great maker during his golden period, which was roughly from 1700 to 1725. So this was the period of Stradivari's output when he was producing the very finest of his instruments. They're all amazing, of course, but this period in particular is singled out as producing the best of his violins. Now, this violin ended up in St. Petersburg. How did it end up there? Well, it was owned by a young English aristocrat called Mr. Ward, who was an attaché at St. Petersburg at the embassy in Russia. Now, as a backdrop to this story, the Franco-Prussian War was in progress, and so perhaps the attaché was there for military reasons. But he was a young person, and he took his violin with him. He had the fortune of owning a Stradivarius instrument, and he would go out for musical soirees in St. Petersburg in the evenings, presumably, being an amateur violinist, to enjoy classical soirees with friends and musicians. On one occasion, something really weird happened to him, and catastrophic, really. It appears that after playing at a musical evening at the house of one of his friends, he was fondling a parrot which bit him on the lip. At first, nothing was thought of the slight wound, but he afterwards caught cold and it festered, producing a blood poisoning, to which unfortunately he succumbed. So the moral of that story is maybe be careful when you fondle a strange parrot that doesn't know you.
Birdie num num. Birdie num num. Birdie num num. A birdie num num.
So a freak accident, you could say. He died. And so then the question was, what was to become of the violin? Well, his mother asked for the Stradivarius violin to be returned, so it was sent in its case back to England. But when George Hart opened the violin, instead of finding a Stradivarius in there as they were expecting, there was just nothing but a cheap common fiddle inside the case. So it appears that somebody had deviously swapped out the Strad for some cheap rubbish violin and sent it back to England, so profiting from the tragedy. So I'm getting this information from Tarisio. Let me just read to you the account. There appears to be little doubt that the robbery had been effected in St. Petersburg, as it was most positively asserted and afterwards proved that the violin case had never been opened since it reached England, until the moment when this disgraceful theft was discovered to have been perpetrated. Poor George Hart, in whom I lose a highly valued friend, is long since dead. His son, the present representative of that well-known house, was very young at the time of the above incidents, and probably I am one of the few persons who could recognise with tolerable certainty the stolen Stradivari should I ever see it again. The sad thing is, this violin never surfaced again, and has remained missing since 1869, So it makes you wonder, will it ever pop up somewhere, somehow? Or has it been lost to history like so many fine violins have, sadly? Now, let's just consider the description. Unfortunately, there are no photos of this violin, and the photos that I'll show on the screen are other 1709 instruments, but not this one. We have no photos of it because it disappeared so long ago. But it's described in this article. It says that it was a very elegant instrument and in perfect preservation, rather flatter than the generality of Stradivari violins. It was said to be dated 1709 and to have previously formed part of the Plowden collection. The colour was monotonous, a rather dark brown and dull, but all along the purfling it was inlaid with small triangular ivory plates, or ivory and ebony, alternately black and white, which gave it, of course, a very striking appearance. So it was an inlaid instrument as well. So obviously, if it did surface, it would be very, very easy to recognise the instrument. This was the only Stradivari violin that I'd ever seen decorated in this manner, but I had long been aware that violins of other makers are thus inlaid, and when I first saw the instrument in question, this made me doubt that it was really by the great Cremonese maker to whom it was attributed. The tone was brilliant and soft, though not of a peculiarly luscious character. That is all I can remember of it from Mr. Ward Stradivary. It's from the book Antonio Stradivari and His Instruments, William Henley. So it's William Henley who appears to be relating this experience. And I'll leave you the link to the Territio page, and I'm sure you'll agree that's yet another fascinating story of a Stradivarius. There are many more, but this one in particular stood out to me, how the owner got bitten by a parrot, died, the violin was stuck out in Russia, then it was arranged to be sent home, and some scumbag swapped it for a cheap one and kept it and sent the cheap one back to England. What a fascinating story.